all right. We are live. Welcome in, everyone. We've got Dragon Knight Dragonborn and Admiral Paco. How you doing today? I'm sure we'll have more people coming in later. That's all right. I know it's been a minute since my last stream. And it's been even longer than that since my last review stream, which means I have a big old backlog of movies to review, because even though I haven't been doing the review streams, I've still been watching the movies. So today we're going to get into a lot of that. And just as a tease of how many we've got, let's see. We've got Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, Mars Express, Tarot, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, East Bay, Back to Black, If, The Strangers Chapter 1, I Saw the TV Glow, Furiosa Mad Max Saga, Sight, The Garfield Movie, Ezra, In a Violent Nature, Young Woman and the Sea, The Watchers, and Bad Boys Ride or Die. Like I said, it's a lot of movies we're going to be getting through. And I have been kind of dealing with like some executive dysfunction. That's a big part of the reason why it's taken me so long to get to these. One of my things with ADHD is like once I am like knocked out of a routine, it is really, really hard to get back into the swing of things. And so it's just been a thing where I kind of want to compare it to like, if you've ever played in an MMO, there's something called tank anxiety, where you, if you're playing as a tank versus, DPS, there's like this anxiety because so much is riding on your shoulders that makes you like hesitant to get started. And I used to play as a tank, and I had massive tank anxiety there, and it ended up like I ultimately just kind of stopped running dungeons because of it. And I think it's just it feels very similar. Like the last couple of times when I was like, I'm gonna be streaming today, and then like I get closer to it and I just kind of feel the anxiety creeping up on me. And so it's one of those things, I'm doing okay. It's just, it's something I'm aware of in my mind. It's something that I gotta work through. You have tank anxiety every day, Leftist Owl? Nice. Hey, Axel05 and Leftist Owl. Welcome in, everyone. Now, even though I've got all of those movies to review, and, well, let's be honest, that's plenty of content for a single stream, I actually have something else that I wanted to get into for a warm-up section. So that's not how you spell witch. Okay. Let's start with this segment. So Lionsgate, I think it's Lionsgate, or Artisan Entertainment, or one of those, whatever company currently owns the rights to the Blair Witch Project, they have announced that they're going to be doing a reboot of it. And there was an article that came across Variety about the original cast of the first Blair Witch Project. And considering that, like, when I started streaming on this channel, I was doing a lot of, like, looking into, I was covering the strikes and everything. And so I have a strong empathy for and desire to advocate for the actual creatives working in film, the actors, the behind the scenes people, like the workers who actually make the movies, not the producers who are cashing the fat checks. And this Variety article came across my desk. The Blair Witch Project actors call out reprehensible behavior after missing out on profits for decades. Don't do what we did. Now, I don't know if I'm going to read the whole thing, but basically, the premise is they were doing an indie film, and nobody knew that the Blair Witch Project was going to be the mega hit that it was, right? It was like, I think at the time, the most financially successful film ever in terms of dollars in versus dollars out, right? I think it ended up making $250 million at the box office, and I'm pretty sure it was shot for less than $100,000. And these three people literally made the movie, because the way that the movie is shot, originally the intention was they were going to do a mockumentary where they're going to use about 10 minutes of footage of them in the woods. And so they sent the three actors into the woods with all of the film equipment and prompts for the story, but it was up to them to operate all of the film equipment and come up with all of the dialogue for the entire film. And basically, while they're out there, they would have other production teams set up things and spook them in their tents and stuff like that, right? But for the most part, the vast majority of this movie was just made by these three people, and they were paid nothing for it because it was an indie project. They were paid I think $500 a week plus room and board and food. And let's go into this because there's some things that I was... Okay, so as it says, in the summer of '99, Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard were trapped in a strange sort of limbo. The Blair Witch Project, their debut feature, had exploded out of the Sundance Film Festival that January to become one of the most influential horror movies of the past 25 years, and with a $35,000 budget, one of the most profitable independent films ever made. And yet Donahue was still puttering to her temp job in a 1984 Toyota Celica before it broke down right underneath a billboard with her face on it. Williams' boss kept asking him why he was still moving furniture in Westchester, New York when he was on the cover of Newsweek. And Leonard found himself serving food to his agent at a catering gig days before he appeared on The Tonight Show. So this is what happens to non-union workers, especially in the indie film circuit. I support indie films, but you gotta be careful. They can really screw you over, especially if they are non-union. My agent asked me what the fuck I was doing, Leonard says. I said, you know that I haven't made any money. We were all struggling to pay the rent. We're gonna go, right. Okay, so, here, basically, for months, the three endured, right. Okay, so, as part of the marketing for the film, they were using their real names. The characters in the movie have the names of the three actors who were playing them. And they were not allowed to go to the premiere, and they were admonished for taking other acting jobs because the studio in the marketing wanted to maintain the facade that this was like real found footage. These people were really missing, and that's why they were using their real names, and they didn't want them to make public appearances. That's why they weren't invited to the premiere of the movie that they fucking made. And look at this. To commemorate the film breaking $100 million at the domestic box office, Artisan sent each actor a fruit basket. This film made $250 million. And it was made entirely on the work of these three actors. They were filming everything. They were coming up with the dialogue. All of the most memorable moments in the movie, the iconic shot of Heather tearily confessing to the camera in the dead of night, that's the shot everyone knows about from the Blair Witch. That was all her. There was no script writer or director on set telling her to do that. No, she came up with that, and she got nothing for it. And yeah, that was when it became clear that, wow, we were not going to get anything, Donahue says. We were being cut out of something that we were intimately involved with creating. Even as Blair Witch earned $248 million worldwide, the movie's once-in-a-generation popularity began to feel more like a chokehold. Through online abuse and humiliation, career changes, and lawsuits, it's taken a quarter century for Donahue, Williams, and Leonards to loosen the bruising grip of Blair Witch on their lives, but they've never quite felt free of it. And I'm not just going to read the whole article, but it goes on to talk about how they weren't consulted when the studio announced that they were going to be doing a reboot of the Blair Witch, even though it sounded like they were going to be using their real names again, because these characters had their real names. And even though there's like a settlement, because they had gone to court over this before, because they were basically not making anything off of this, and they were still trying to profit off of their image. There was a 2016 Blair Witch movie that was supposed to be focusing on Heather's brother, and like she had to be like, no, you're not going to use my last name, you're not going to use my image to promote this. So I haven't seen the film, I think they just call her Heather and she's just like off screen or something like that. I could be wrong, I haven't seen it, but this... Yeah, on April 10th, Lionsgate, which acquired Artisan in 2003, revealed at CinemaCon that it was rebooting the Blair Witch Project. Yeah, nobody gave them a heads up. They had no idea it was coming. And this film franchise, because they weren't union at the time, like basically they're working with SAG-AFTRA right now to try and get, backdated residuals for the project, because it's made Lionsgate so much money. But because they're not union, basically all they have to go on is expecting a corporation to give money because it's the right thing to do. Without like legal pressure, the only thing that they can do is social pressure. And social pressure historically is not the best way to get a company to part with money they don't want to part with. But it's what we've got. So Lionsgate, I know you're not watching this video, but if you are, pay these people. They made this movie that you're trying to profit off of, okay? The entire found footage horror genre spawned from this movie. And again, the original idea for the film was that they were filming something that was just going to be like 10 minutes out of like a more like traditionally edited mockumentary. And then they ended up deciding, you know what? No, we're just going to have this footage be the whole movie. So they took the contracts that they were offered for an indie film, thinking, whatever, it might be something fun to show to my friends. Nobody's going to see it. It's a small, zero budget movie. And they got screwed out of pretty much everything. I think eventually they had a settlement where they got like a 5-figure settlement, which is nice, but the movie made $250 million, and they made the movie. So, Lionsgate, pay these people. All right. How you doing, me? Welcome in. All right, I'm getting some water, and then we're gonna get into the reviews. All right. By the way, does everyone like this backdrop? The animated one? You'll notice it's actually the same aquarium here. If I turn off this, you can see the old one here. You can tell that it's the same aquarium because that like green rock piece in the back there, that's the same one that's right here. So I just figured I could have, I got some Nemos and Dories swimming in the background. Just thought it would be cute. All right. What's my first movie to review? Oh yeah. Rebel Moon Part 2. Let's do this. Alright, so I reviewed the first Rebel Moon. I guarantee you don't need to go back and watch my review of that one. You don't need to watch Rebel Moon Part 1 at all. I can sum it up for you like this. Imagine a D&D campaign where instead of the party meeting at a tavern, you go and pick up each party member and then stretch that out to 2 hours, and that's the movie. It's so inconsequential what happens in the first part that I was watching this with some friends, and I told them, don't worry, you don't need to have seen the first part. I'll fill you in on anything you need to know. And then the movie opens with 3 minutes of Anthony Hopkins narrating all of the events of the first part. So really, if you're looking to see this Rebel Moon thing, if you're curious to check it out, just start with part 2. You're not missing a thing. But I can't recommend that you watch this movie other than the schadenfreude of watching what happens when Zack Snyder has full creative control of his own IP, so there's nothing for him to bastardize from something else. It's just, this is him. This is what he himself can come up with that is pure and untainted, and it's just his vision, and it's nothing. Okay? It's such a paper-thin premise. It's just he wanted to make his own Star Wars, and he didn't want to put in the effort to properly develop it. There's the subtitle is, part 2, the Scargiver. And Sophia Boutell's character, the main character, she has the nickname of the Scargiver because she's the one who was set up to take the fall for the assassination of the royal family. And she has given the villain, who's some admiral guy, he has a scar from his fight with her in the first movie. And he's just I want to keep it because I have been given a scar by the Scargiver. And it seems like maybe you call her the Scargiver because she gave you that scar. She didn't scar the royal family. She was framed for the murder of the royal family, right? So the title just doesn't make any sense, and it's just overly explanatory. He could just say, I got a scar. I'm gonna get that Scargiver. It's such a stupid title. A bunch of this movie is literally just watching people harvest grain, because again, the plot of the first movie was the Empire, or the homeworld, or whatever it's called. It doesn't matter. This is Star Wars, just not Star Wars. Is they've come to this farm planet and they're we want all of your grain to supply our troops, and we're coming back in 6 weeks, and you better have all our grain. And so they spend that 6 weeks instead gathering 5 or 6 people to help them fight off the Empire. And so then this movie, it does the standard, oh, let's teach these farm people how to defend themselves while we, with our more advanced combat knowledge, can help back them up. And so basically every trope you've ever seen in any of those things, it's all played out here. There's a character who she's her whole identity is that she is a mother who lost her children, and she ends up sacrificing herself for a kid in this movie that she has no relationship to. Literally what happened is that kid looked at her earlier in the movie. I'm not joking. It was just a moment where they just have a kid who lives in the farm and he looks at her. And because of that, there's a connection. And she sacrifices herself for him, and it's her getting closure for having failed to protect her daughter or something like that. And there's just no effort put into building up the relationship between her and the kid. The kid, I don't even remember if he has any lines. And her death sequence is so drawn out that I got bored, started looking at my phone, and then looked up because I forgot I was watching the movie, and only then did she die. It was so long that I got bored, and when I remembered that I was watching the movie after looking at my phone for a minute, then she died. That's how drawn out that death sequence is. In terms of the action, I have often if I have a general praise for Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, I think he makes interesting action sequences. And even that is really just not on display here. Given a blank canvas and unlimited freedom from Netflix to do whatever he wants, he basically ends up recreating that thing. You remember, like, the late 2000s video game meta of everything is more realistic and gritty, and by that they mean they put a brown filter on everything? Well, that's this movie. The entire field is basically, they have the battlefield itself is over the harvested wheat field, and so that automatically is a very brown thing to look at, and all of the explosions are brown and all of the ships are brown, and it's just like shades of brown. I just, obviously I wasn't going to recommend this movie. It is better than the first one because something actually happens, but it's just, Zack Snyder has had so many chances, and he keeps failing upward. He keeps getting all of these huge budget films from established properties, and he's got a small, loyal fan base of basically film idiots who think that he has invented every film shot ever made. And this is the best that he can come up with when he's left to his own devices. When Netflix is just paying for him to make a big movie because Netflix wants to recapture the success of the Snyder Cut, right? This is all he can do. And he's gonna be releasing, I don't actually know if it's out yet, but I know he was like doing a director's cut of these two films. And why? It's being released directly to Netflix. There's no rating that you need to worry about. It can be R, and it'll just be fine because there's no box office to worry about. It's just on Netflix. But he made a PG-13 movie, and the director's cut is going to be R, and it's going to be 4 hours long probably, and like, don't let him get away with it. Because at least with, like, say Batman versus Superman, I argue that if you're going to watch that movie, you need to watch the Ultimate Edition, because otherwise you're watching a version that has cut out all of the parts of the movie that explain what Lex Luthor's plan is. But here, there's no mandate from Netflix saying that his movie has to be a certain length. That makes no sense, because Netflix knows who Zack Snyder is, so they know what they're getting with him. And so this is just him trying to build on, the whole thing of, oh, wait for the director's cut. That's when you get the good stuff. And it just lets him get away with making mediocre products and then reselling them to you later for the hype. And the worst part of it all is that the movie ends on a cliffhanger. I thought this was going to be a 2 and done. No. We're getting apparently a third movie. Why? This should have been... This movie could have been a memo, is what I'm saying. And now it's being stretched out into a third one. Whatever. I'm probably not going to be reviewing that one. I cannot recommend this movie. Zack Snyder has had like 2 projects where it's just really been him. It hasn't been any established properties. It's just been him. And the first one was Sucker Punch. And that is like the most Snyder film ever, because he basically just invented a scenario where he can have action sequences disconnected from anything that the story is actually telling. And then here, he's trying to build his own mythos, and he's just got the most generic, cliched, uninteresting thing. He's not good at directing actors. There's no profound dialogue or anything like that. It's just flat and boring. Don't watch it. Also, hey Jazz Dog, how's it going? All right, next movie. Mars Express is a French animated film. It's a cyberpunk mystery film. I would say murder mystery kind of a film. And I hadn't heard about it before. I just saw that it was playing at the local theater, but I saw French animated cyberpunk. Absolutely, sign me up. And this movie is like if the Will Smith I, Robot movie was actually good. Like, it's a very similar premise to that movie. Except instead of the 3 laws coming together to form the 0th law and having the robots take control of humanity to make sure that humanity is protecting itself, this is more of a robots are trying to break their programming because they're being oppressed. And one thing that I really like about this film is that traditionally cyberpunk stuff has been shot more like grimy and more like flashy sci-fi, you know, like you've got your neon lights and everything like that. But this, everything feels, even though it's set in the future, everything feels very like American suburbs. And there's nothing is like overly exaggerated. The action sequences are fairly short and punctuated, you know, like the art style itself is actually fairly subdued. But I think that all serves the broader purpose of the film in trying to show you the oppression under the surface, even in our own society, right? And it's a very interesting film. It's I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. It's been a couple weeks since I watched it, so it's not the freshest in my mind. But I would recommend checking this one out. I don't know if it's on streaming or whatever. It was just very briefly in theaters for me, but I was genuinely pleasantly surprised by this film, and I would recommend taking a look. Okay, this movie's called Tarot. I'm sure there's other movies called Tarot. There's like, what, 5 different Ouija movies? They're always the same thing. Let's take some board game or other game that has some, you know, loose associations with the occult, so that we can make a spooky movie about, oh no, they did it and then they got attacked by demons. And this is just the latest in a long line of those movies. And honestly, this movie was done a lot better 25 years ago when it was called Final Destination. And I really liked Final Destination. I thought that was a great movie. I don't know about all of the sequels, but the first Final Destination was a really fun movie. And this is it's really just that. But I also think this movie kind of wanted to hint at like being in the same universe as Cabin in the Woods, the Joss Whedon, Drew Gooden. Drew Gooden's a YouTuber. Who directed that one? Drew Goddard. Yeah. Because if you've seen The Cabin in the Woods, which is like a deconstruction of, you know, the slasher flick, right? There's a sequence where when they get into the cabin, they go down into the basement, and it's full of all sorts of cursed artifacts, and whichever one they open and activate or whatever determines what thing is going to kill them. And they literally just ripped that sequence from Cabin in the Woods for this movie. They're a bunch of like college kids who have done an Airbnb at like an old mansion for the weekend so they can all get drunk and have fun, and then they go into the one room of the house that they're not supposed to go into, and it's full of like all sorts of occult stuff, and they just happen upon this cursed tarot deck, and they do a reading with the tarot deck, and because they were using this cursed tarot deck, cursed by a witch who had been unjustly executed for giving somebody an accurate reading way back when. She has, cursed this deck to basically give people the bloodiest interpretations of whatever their tarot reading is. And so all of the deaths are very much related to the reading that they get at the start of the movie, coupled with like the witch herself like makes an appearance as like the manifestation of the artwork on that tarot card. So there's like maybe a little bit of like artistic creativity just in the monster designs there, but you don't see a lot of them. They're very brief, and honestly it's a very by the numbers slasher flick. You can just watch the tarot scene and go, okay, yeah, I know exactly how all of these people are going to die. And then it just plays pretty much out like that. Jazzdoc says, do the cards they draw summon the card or something? So the cards that they draw as they are doing the reading for everyone, because like basically they're all drunk and then they just go inside, they're like, oh, I found this tarot deck, let's just I know how to do a tarot reading, so I'll just give everyone a reading. And it's whatever card that they were drawn, the entity that's drawn on that card is the thing that shows up to give them their karmic death or whatever, right? Hi Lady Kalgana. Yeah, it shows up in live chat, but the embedded chat on stream, I can't change that from top chat to live chat, so sorry if it got filtered out, but I did see you there. Welcome in. Anyway, this is not a good movie. It's not the worst horror movie I've ever seen, but it's certainly one of the blandest. If you are looking to waste 90 minutes and it's on Netflix, I don't know, put it on while you're like doing something else. It's really there's nothing to it. That's all I got to say about it. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the fourth movie in the current Planet of the Apes film franchise. I think there have been like a dozen Planet of the Apes movies altogether, but when people talk about Planet of the Apes now, they're mostly thinking of the Andy Serkis trilogy, right? And I have really loved this film franchise, especially the second one, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I think that movie is probably one of the strongest anti-war movies I've ever seen. And what I really love about this franchise is that for such a stupid premise where you have a monkey with machine guns on a horseback, like, they give you characters that you actually care about with nuanced perspectives, and it doesn't shy away from morally gray areas. And I think this movie definitely continues in that tradition. I would say out of all of the characters, like Noah, who's the new main ape, because this is hundreds of years after the third movie, so Caesar's long dead. And the humans have all mostly succumbed to the virus, so they can't talk. There's only a limited subset of humans who can still talk. And so we're kind of now just into the apes have had hundreds of years now, so they're starting to build up their own society. They're learning to develop their own technology. And so a big part of this is the apes have found a cache of human technology that's like locked in a bunker, and they're trying to get into it. And we're dealing with, differing factions, because the main character, Noah, he's not part of this kingdom, right? He and his tribe were kidnapped by this new Caesar that he's declaring himself as, the Ape King, and who has been like studying human history. He's actually got a historian, a human historian with him. You know, one of the humans who's immune to the virus, so he still has his faculties. He can still talk. And so he's like trying to bring about like a new Roman Empire, but with, you know, the apes, and Caesar to him is kind of like, you know, a rallying figure where they really don't remember anything about what Caesar actually talked about, other than the most bare bones stuff like, you know, apes together strong, which, you know, if you know anything about fascism, like the symbol of fascism is, you know, a bundle of sticks tied together because that's harder for them to break. Not saying that Caesar's a fascist. I think Caesar's argument, apes together strong, is a very good one. It's just, it's interesting seeing how somebody's words can be twisted through the lens of history and how people have forgotten things. And the human characters in this movie are very morally complicated. There's a character who is like set up to be a very sympathetic character, but the actions that she takes throughout the movie can actually be like read as horrific. And again, like I said, I really think like the only just like genuinely good character in this movie, good in terms of morality, not good in terms of writing, I think they're all great, is the main character of Noah and his family. But these movies always grapple with, you know, themes of, I would say this movie, it really kind of deals with the last gasps of humanity trying to maintain control over whatever scraps of their past that they have left, and trying to keep the apes down. Because that's the thing, is like, they're trying to get into this cache of old human technology, and the humans who are still capable of speech are like, no, this isn't for you, this is ours, you can't have it, even though, like, dude, humanity is like hooked. Who are you defending them from? Like, it would be better, it would be to everyone's benefit if you all could just work together, which is a message that has been like consistently throughout the entire film franchise. It would be better if you would stop fighting and work together, but all of everyone's, you know, differing desires, differing objectives, and competing visions, you know, they all clash to make that pretty much impossible. But I don't think this is my favorite of the Planet of the Apes movies. That's still Dawn, but I really liked this one. I was really impressed with it. I think it flopped, which is disappointing for the future of the franchise, especially because I kind of feel like the movie ends hinting that the next movie is going to be the one where the astronaut returns, you know, like the setting of the original Planet of the Apes movie. And I would love to see that. I would love to see that movie done. But yeah, I really liked this one. I would recommend it. Also, Tipster Raid, thank you! Hey, Tipster, how's it going? Welcome in. What's my next one? East Bay. Okay. East Bay is a low-budget indie film that I almost want to say, like, I suspect that the title of East Bay was, like, not chosen by the filmmaker, but by the distributor, because so many times throughout the movie, they just keep repeating this line of, like, mediocre middle-aged man. And I almost think that was the intended title for this movie. But it's about a bunch of middle-aged men who are failures in life and kind of grappling with, you know, so nobody told you life was gonna be this way. You know, but not in the happy, you know, 90s sitcom Friends way, just in the general, oh yeah, okay, life does kind of suck and I didn't make anything of my life. And especially for the main character, who is he's Asian, and he dealt with, you know, the overbearing parents who wanted him to, you know, succeed, and he's done nothing with his life. He's an aspiring filmmaker, but like nobody likes his films. He struggles to relate well to women, and the film has, I think, unfortunate like misogynist tendencies in terms of the way that all of the women are portrayed in the film. They're pretty much all some flavor of histrionic. And I think the film tries to backpedal on that a little bit by, like, revealing that the main character is an unreliable narrator. And but I don't know how much that actually does to counter the issues. Like, I really, really hated how all the women in this movie were written. And the film kind of feels a little autobiographical. I don't know all that went into making it. I think that the star of the movie was also directing and writing it, but I could be mistaken. And it just felt like he has some unresolved issues with women that he was working out here, and maybe tried to downplay it by saying that the main character himself is also an asshole and unreliable. So the women that we see them in the film aren't how the women actually are, but it's his distorted viewpoint of how they are. But like, that might just be cope. So I didn't really like this one, and I can't recommend it that much. Hey, Ness's Best, welcome in. How's it going? It is indeed a woke fish stream. I have indeed awoken. And my next move. Hey, Windleby, happy birthday, everyone. Tell Windleby happy birthday. It's her birthday today. She won't tell me how old she is, so you'll have to do it. But happy birthday, Windleby. Wow. You thought you were just gonna sneak in. Nope. Hang on, we got a plane going overhead. I don't know if you can hear that, but I can hear that. I don't usually hear planes going overhead. That is unusual. I'm sure you can't hear it, but I can hear it, and it's hard for me to think. So, turning 34. Ooh. Oh, don't worry. We won't tell anyone that you're turning 34. That's a secret. It's just between you and me, okay? Don't let the rest of chat know. All right. Next review. Back to Black is the Amy Winehouse biopic. And, like, I am really, really tired of biopics, especially musician biopics. So many of them just come across as, like, a vanity for the family of the musician to you know, just be like, oh, well, you know, we got to get their story told. But, like, you can write an autobiography. I feel like if you're gonna make a film about a musician, you should have something to say other than, oh, here's this person who lived a tragic life, and isn't it tragic, and go watch their tragic life, right? And yeah, I don't know. I especially considering how many of these films just, like, will embellish a lot. Yeah. That being said, I was actually positively surprised by this film, because the trailer for it looked absolutely awful. And I don't, like, I have to imagine whoever edited that trailer had it out for Marissa Abella, who plays Amy Winehouse, because the trailer showed all of her worst line reads in the movie. Like, from the trailer, I was just like, oh god, she's gonna be horrible playing Amy Winehouse. But actually, I thought she did a really good job. It's just they picked the worst parts of the movie to put into the trailer. They picked all the worst lines and the worst line reads. Her performance is actually really good. I actually think she does a really good job here. And she does her own singing. Now I'm not the biggest Amy Winehouse fan. Like, right, I've heard Rehab. Everyone's heard Rehab, but it wasn't like I was familiar with her entire discography or anything like that. But like, I was genuinely wondering watching the movie. I'm like, how did they get her to sound so much like Amy Winehouse? Because like, when she's doing her performance in Rehab, like she's singing it differently than it is on the the radio, the album version, right? But she still sounds like Amy Winehouse, and it turns out no, she just got really good at singing like Amy Winehouse. And to be fair, Amy Winehouse developed that singing style from listening to older like blues and soul musicians, right? And there is a discussion to be had about how much Amy Winehouse appropriated from black musicians that I'm not really prepared to get into here, other than to say that she wasn't like born with that voice. She developed it because of the genres of music that she grew up listening to. And so it is a style that you can learn to sing in, and I think that's the big thing. Not necessarily that Marissa Abella perfectly copied Amy Winehouse's voice, but that she really did a good job at having the exact same singing style. And I think that is like a big part of the heavy lifting, because if you had Amy Winehouse just singing a flat happy birthday, not in her style, it wouldn't sound like Amy Winehouse to people, right? So yeah, I think as far as the vocal performances go, I was actually really impressed. I thought she did a really good job. In terms of the story, it's Amy Winehouse. She had a tragic life. She was a bit of a hot mess. She died at 27 from was it alcohol poisoning or an overdose of something? And she lived a sad life. And the movie doesn't shy away from that. It does do the thing where like it cuts to black and then it says, "Oh yeah, this person died on this date" or whatever, and they don't actually show the death, which it's a tasteful ending, especially if the family's gonna come see it. They probably don't want to watch like a depiction of their loved one dying. But I still have to get back to the fact that like it's just, here's the story of Amy Winehouse's life, and I don't think that makes an interesting enough reason to make a biopic. And speaking of like biopics that are coming out, there's the Pharrell Williams biopic has been announced. Actually, the trailer's out for it. It's called Piece by Piece, and that biopic is done in Lego. He's got a Lego animated biopic where basically everyone in the movie is just voicing themselves, but as Lego versions. And like, see that. I want to see more things like that, where like they find a creative hook for the biopic. They find a reason to do it beyond just telling your life story. You find something. Either you find a creative way of doing it, or you find a specific reason that you want to tell the story beyond I just want people to know what my life story is. And I don't think Back to Black is anything special in that regard. I do think Marissa Abella actually does a really good job playing Amy Winehouse. I just can't recommend it because it's, other than that, just a bog standard musician biopic. If is a movie that a lot of people have been comparing to Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And I've only seen like one episode of Foster's Home, and that was like, I don't know, a decade ago. I really don't remember it, but it is a very similar premise in that there is a retirement home for imaginary friends whose kids abandons them because they grew up, right? And it's John Krasinski directs it. He plays the sick dad who has an unspecified illness that for some reason lets him dance around in his hospital room wearing regular clothes, even though, like, I think he's, like, supposed to have, like, heart surgery or something, but he's never wearing, like, hospital gowns. And, like, the movie's even set up where, like, I was kind of expecting John Krasinski to be, like, dead the whole time, and like, his daughter just keeps coming to visit him in the hospital, and like the nurse is just like indulging her because she's coping with not with her dad being gone. But they didn't even do that. Like, that would have been the obvious Sixth Sense ending, but they didn't go with that. But John Krasinski, Jim from The Office, he brings in a whole bunch of Office alum to voice all of the different CGI imaginary friend characters. Ryan Reynolds plays the guy who basically is running the whole thing and trying to help get imaginary friends into new kids, and he enlists the aid of this girl to get everyone done. And it's like, if you see in the trailer, you kind of you know what you're getting into. It's not great. It's just kind of meh. I've seen better films from John Krasinski. I really liked A Quiet Place. This one just felt like he was making a movie for his kids, and there really wasn't any kind of passion to it. And, there's like they try to have a twist ending, but like you can see it coming like a billion miles away. And I don't know, like, if you're looking for something that's kind of just like sappy and saccharine, it is that. If you want to just put something on and have your kids watch it so they're not bothering you for a couple hours, it works for that. But it is a kids movie, and I don't think it offers enough for the adult viewers to really hold its interest. As far as the other comparisons to Foster's Home for Imaginary Kids, I haven't seen, or for Imaginary Friends, I haven't seen that show, so I can't really talk about that. I just know that, yeah, it was Filler noise for kids. Yeah, there you go. The Strangers, Chapter 1, is apparently, I guess, like the third movie in the Strangers film franchise. I didn't know until like after I saw the trailer for this one that there had been other movies, but I guess this one serves as kind of like a thematic reboot. Like, he's following the themes of the other ones, but basically the premise is there's a couple who their car breaks down and they have to spend the night in a cabin, and some strangers show up and start messing with them. And that is the general plot of the movie. The tone of the movie is really oppressive, and it really doesn't let up at any point. Like, the tension on the movie is like, basically it never goes, it's like the dial doesn't go below like a 7. Like, from 7 to 10, it's just always on. You're just always like feeling bad, like watching these people be tormented and tortured by these strangers whose motivations we never learn. They're just wearing masks, and they're just there to mess with and try and kill people. And because it never lets up, because there's no real moments of cathartic release, it kind of exhausts you. And I think that's to the film's detriment. I think because there's no real moments of reprieve in the movie, it's just always on. You're just always like, oh god, what are they going to what's going to happen to them next? What are they going to do next? Once you get to the climax of the film, I feel like it doesn't hit as hard as it could because you have been emotionally exhausted by that point. Um, and apparently this is like chapter 1 of a trilogy. When is chapter 2 coming out? Strangers chapter 2 release date. It's expected to release later this year. You know, like, I don't know. I'll see it, but I don't really know that like this film itself is strong enough to be like, oh yeah, we're going for it. We're doing a trilogy right now. It's just, I don't know. It's a film that you just kind of feel tense and bad the whole time without ever letting up. And because you don't really have that variation, you don't have the release, I think it robs it of its impact. And hopefully the sequel learns to temper that so that when the bad things happen, they hit harder. I am a big fan of horror. And I like movies that like really get into the psychological aspects. Like, I think probably one of my favorite horror movies ever made is Hereditary. And when I saw Hereditary, I walked out of that movie feeling so awful. I was like, I never want to watch or think about that movie ever again. But it dug into my brain. I went back and watched it like again 2 days later. And I think that this movie, well, it's, you know, nowhere near as grand or with as strong performances as Hereditary. I feel like it had the potential for that level of like dread and like psychological terror and just like making you feel awful, but because it doesn't let up the entire movie, it just kind of exhausts you to the point where it doesn't hit as hard as it could. So that's my thoughts on that one. All right. I'm sure you've seen other people talk about this movie. If you've got a trans friend, they've probably talked about it at length. I Saw a TV Glow is a horror movie that, if you're trans and if you haven't seen this movie, I really caution you about going to see it. This is a movie about the trans experience, directed by a trans woman, and it's going to emotionally destroy you. When I say horror, it's not like it's not like the slasher kind of a horror. It's more of an existential kind of a horror, and it's the kind of horror that I think somebody outside the queer community watching it, they're not really going to pick up on it. But anyone who's keyed in is going to know exactly what the movie's about pretty much just automatically. And the premise is it's two high school friends who share a bond watching a 90s TV show called The Pink Opaque, which is about two girls who are psychically linked, and they use their psychic link even though they live on like opposite sides of a state. They can use that psychic link to help them fight like the bad guy. And it has kind of like it's a very, you know, 90s sci-fi, almost like Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of like kitschy vibe to it, the show within the show. And because the movie is set starting in the 90s and then going into the 2000s, there's a lot in the film that just like really just feels so authentically 90s. Like the first time the main characters meet, it's in like a high school gym in the 90s, and they're sitting next to a Fruitopia machine. And you know, as somebody who went to high school in the 90s, yes, we did have that exact Fruitopia machine. And there was just a lot of little details that really, really capture the vibe well. There was one thing, though, that I caught was an anachronism, and it's the main character, who's played by Justice Smith, when he meets the other character, who's I forget their names, but he meets her. She's reading the episode guide for the show The Pink Opaque, and she, describes the show to him and talks about like Mr. Melancholy is the big bad. But this scene is set in 1996, and she uses the phrase big bad. And that's an anachronism because the term big bad, if you don't know what that is, the big bad is the overarching villain, right? Like, every season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer had a big bad. You had the big villain for that season, and basically every CW Arrowverse show has copied that formula. The term big bad itself was coined by Joss Whedon for the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which came out in 97, not 96. So you wouldn't have had a kid in 96 saying big bad. But that's a very minor nitpick. That was just something that I noticed. Otherwise, the vibe is very 90s. And, the character is, the movie is done from the perspective of Justice Smith's character, who is very obviously an unreliable narrator, and the film is told kind of not exactly it's not in chronological order. We're seeing bits and pieces of his memory and aspects of his memory that's very obviously off or wrong in some details. And like I said, I don't want to give away the central conceit of the film, but if you're queer, especially if you're trans, it's gonna hit you yes, this is obviously 100% this is what's going on. And I think for general audiences, I think it's gonna be a little more abstract for them. People who aren't tune in, I think they can still appreciate it, but they're not really gonna be hit with the horror. But I have a friend who said that she went and saw it with some of her other trans friends, and that they all needed to give each other aftercare after they got out of the movie, because it touches on some very real aspects of the trans experience, especially staying closeted. And Justice Smith does such a good performance in this movie. There's a scene, I'm just thinking about it and I'm kind of emotional. He is begging for his life to a crowd of people who do not care and just ignore him. And it hits so hard. I didn't think I was going to break up like this, but if you're queer, you see that scene and you know exactly what it is. That it's the pain of dealing with a society that doesn't care about us. And he does such a good performance on it. I don't think it's going to be appreciated by the larger audiences, but it's so good. And I saw this movie weeks ago, and just his pleas is still stick in my mind. So I really recommend this movie. I think it's one of the best movies I've ever seen, but it is a hard movie to watch. So please watch it, but please be careful when you watch it, and make sure that you've got a friend that you can lean on afterward, because it's going to be a hard watch, but it's really important. Okay, I need some water after that one. I think Joseph Smith should get the Oscar for it, honestly. He's not going to. I don't think the Academy is going to really pay attention to this movie. But I think this is probably one of the best queer films I've ever seen.
And yeah, I don't want to get into too much spoilers. I really think you should just go and watch it, but it's gonna click. If you're queer, it's gonna click for you. You're gonna immediately recognize it. Yeah, Curium, as a mentally broken guy, I made a much harder. If you are not sure that you can handle it, then yeah, you might not want to watch it. If you don't think that you've got the support afterward, it is a very hard film. But I think it's a very important film. I think it's a very powerful film. And I would... if you think you are in a mentally okay state, and you are adequately ready for, you know, making sure that you've got somebody that you can talk to afterward, it's a really good movie. And it's a really important movie. I'm actually going to take a break. Little bit of a break before I get into my next review, because that... yeah. I didn't think I was going to get that emotional reviewing that movie. But, oof. How are you all doing? Man, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 8 more movies to review after this. So let's take a little break from that. And just vibe, just talk. What have y'all been watching? I've been watching The Acolyte. I already talked a couple months ago about how I'm not gonna be like doing active like week to week episode reviews of TV shows, because like for one thing, it was kind of like ruining my enjoyment of like anticipating and then watching the episodes. Also, like the way that TV shows are made these days, it's really hard to gauge whether it's gonna be good, because it's not just like here's the episode of the week. Like, you know, like back when TNG was out, you could just take that episode. That's a whole complete story, right? You could just talk about it on its merits. But so many shows these days, like the whole season is like, you know, it's everything is all season long arcs. So if I were to like get into like reviews on The Acolyte, like we're only 3 episodes in, right? I can speculate on things, but I don't know if it's gonna be good yet. Fallout show, I haven't seen that yet. I've heard it was good, but I haven't watched that one yet. I actually only very recently finished season 5 of Discovery, and I'm almost worried that like I'm like losing Star Trek as a special interest, because I don't know, I just kind of like I did not feel compelled to watch the show. I felt like I was watching it out of obligation. And I got to the season finale, or the series finale, I should say, and I didn't really feel anything. And I really liked Discovery. Especially, like, I thought seasons 3 and 4 were getting really good. Season 4 was a really good season of Discovery. And, you know, you know, Star Trek is one of my first loves. I don't remember a time that I wasn't watching Star Trek. But I don't know, like, this show ended and I didn't feel anything. And that kind of sucks. And I don't know, maybe that's depression. But yeah. I'm looking forward to Prodigy season 2. That's actually dropping next month on Netflix, and I think all 20 episodes are dropping all at once. And I really liked Prodigy. I really liked the first season, so that's going to be a lot to binge. Now, I think Prodigy actually already released in France. Like, there was a thing where it had released on a French service, and then, like, the showrunners were like, wait, this wasn't supposed to happen. And then they turned out, oh, no, I guess they did have the rights to release it at that point. So, like,
technically people have been able to watch Prodigy, but in French. So I've just I'm waiting for the US release. Kind of feels bad that they released it in like one territory like months before anywhere else, and it wasn't even the original language version of it, right? I don't understand what was going on there, but I don't know. Looking forward to watching that one. You know, when does Strange New World Season 3 come out? Season 3 release date. Okay, yeah. Strange New World Season 3 is expected to premiere next year, which makes sense. They were gearing up to start production on the third season right before the writer's strike happened, so they got delayed quite a bit, so that's no big surprise. I know later this year we're getting the Star Trek Section 31 movie starring Michelle Yeoh, which I want to be more excited than I am for it. I'm really happy that Michelle Yeoh was like, okay, I have just won an Oscar, and the projects that I want to make sure happens is this Star Trek movie that I'm starring in. Like, that's awesome. I love Michelle Yeoh. She's great. And for her to take her Oscar clout and go, yes, I am dedicated to making sure that this straight-to-streaming Star Trek movie is made. I appreciate her passion. I don't necessarily... I have no idea what the movie is going to really be about. Last time we saw her character, she had been thrown through time, and we don't even know what era she was going to end up in, although I think that they have confirmed that a young Rachel Garrett is going to be in this movie, and Rachel Garrett was the captain of the Enterprise C, which we saw her in the TNG episode Yesterday's Enterprise. So this is probably going to be set about 30-40 years before the Next Generation, so like an in-between period between the original series and the Next Generation. So that should be an interesting era to see, but like, I don't know, because Section 31, they're like, you know, the CIA of the Federation. So it's going to be a very different kind of a Star Trek thing, but... Admiral Pocket says, I relate to feeling like lost passion. I've always loved Star Wars, but I've only watched Bad Batch and Obi-Wan of the online series. I haven't watched Bad Batch yet. I watched like 3 episodes of Bad Batch when it first came out, and I decided it had that, especially like, because I think it's the 2-episode premiere and then the 3rd episode, and the 3rd episode was when I decided I was going to wait, because that one felt very kiddish to me, and it was like, oh, okay, so we're gonna do like it feels like the early seasons of Clone Wars when it was more explicitly made for kids. Why don't I wait until the show is done and then I can just binge it all and get through the kiddish stuff? I don't know how kiddish it was even beyond that episode. I just remember not particularly liking the little girl clone character and thinking that episode was far too focused on her. But, you know, I was hearing good things about season 3 of Bad Batch. I also heard that they were like doing some tie-ins to the sequel trilogy, which I know made Star Wars Theory very upset. So maybe I want to see it for that. But yeah. All right. That's my next review. Yes. Hang on, let me pull out my phone notes for this one. All right. Okay. Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is the long-awaited spin-off prequel to Mad Max Fury Road. And I know some people were butthurt that it wasn't really a Mad Max movie because Mad Max isn't in it, but you're wrong. He is in the movie for like 2 seconds. You can see him looking over a cliff at Furiosa driving somewhere. I really liked this movie. I think George Miller has a really strong visual style. The action in this movie is phenomenal. I don't think this movie is as good as Fury Road. I think Fury Road is just
probably the best action movie ever made, if I'm being real. So that is, that's hard to follow up and hard to live up to. But the movie has really engaging action set pieces. Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, does a really great job as Furiosa, as a younger Charlize Theron character. Chris Hemsworth, fantastic villain. He wears a fake nose, which, like, I'm not sure whether the fake nose is like to imply that he broke his nose or something, because of the harsh environment of the wastelands. But, the movie basically just tells Furiosa's life story from, the time she was a kid to... The movie literally ends with the start of Fury Road. It's her loading the wives into the big rig. So, just all of that, it's just... This is her story leading up to Fury Road. And I think the credits, I actually, jumped out as soon as the credits started because I had another movie that was starting right away, but it's my understanding that they played clips from Fury Road over the credits. And so it's honestly, it surprised me a little bit because the Mad Max movies have never cared that much about maintaining continuity from movie to movie. It's always really just been like Max is like a character who is just wandering through whatever story George Miller happens to want to tell. But this movie very much is like, yeah, we want to respect the canon of Fury Road, and so a bunch of the characters that you meet in Fury Road are in Furiosa. So we've got Immortan Joe and his whole thing with, the War Boys and Bullet Town and Gas Town and all of that. So like that whole area, it just is building up more of, here are the politics and the trading going on between the different cities and how they deal with like coups and stuff like that. And the central, point of the movie is Furiosa seeking revenge on Chris Hemsworth character, whose name in the movie I forget, so I'm looking it up right now. Hemsworth Furiosa. Dementis is his name. Yeah, that's the central thing, is her seeking revenge against Dementis for, kidnapping her as a child. And I think Chris Hemsworth does a phenomenal job playing this villain. And he plays him kind of as a pathetic guy who's like really trying to punch above his weight level, and shows like his own failures and successes independent of anything to do with Furiosa. But a lot of the movie is just him constantly biting off more than he can chew. And I like that. I don't like to see like Immortan Joe in Fury Road was far more of just a all-consuming oppressive force who had absolute control of his city, right? And that is not Dementis at all. So it's a very different kind of a villain, but very much, like the Mad Max movies are all about here is the apocalypse. Here's the kind of weird little guys that you get in the apocalypse. And like there's a character called the History Man, who's basically a mentat. Like, I'm sitting here watching a movie in which people are warring in the desert over a scarce resource, and there is a guy whose job it is to just have all of the knowledge. Like, his body is covered in tattoos that are basically just pages of encyclopedias tattooed on him, and he just is like they just ask him to like recall data and stuff like that. So he's straight up a mentat from Dune, but in the Mad Max universe. I really like it. The great great world building, great story, great revenge story, especially the end. Her actually like seeking out revenge, because like the movie tries to make the point that like getting revenge doesn't actually like fix your life. It doesn't actually like improve anything, and after you've got revenge, your life still continues, and you have to figure out what it is that you're going to do with it. And all of this is basically explicitly stated by the villain of the film, doing a fantastic speech. Chris Hemsworth is a delight in this movie. I really like Chris Hemsworth as an actor. I think he does great work. I think, honestly, of all of the Chris's, I kind of feel like he's the best one. And I highly recommend this movie. I was actually thinking though, like, and I said this kind of as a joke at first. I was talking to Doe about this movie, and I kind of made the joke, like, imagine if, like, the apocalypse was actually over and, like, the rest of the world had, like, recovered from it, and they were all, like, an industrialized, like, civilized society again, and they were just like leaving Australia to its own devices. Imagine like all of these people didn't actually have to live in the outback and fighting each other for water and oil, but like the rest of the world didn't even bother to tell them that they had fixed things and it was all good again. Like, imagine they're just like, nah, Australia, we're just gonna leave them to their own devices. But then I thought, wait, what if we did that like not as a joke? What if it turned out that, like, say there's some lithium deposit discovered in the outback, and all of a sudden the wasteland, which has been ignored by the outside world, suddenly is being shown interest by the outside world, and you can do like an interesting story about, I guess I'm just talking about Dune again, but you could do an interesting story about, you know, the well-meaning liberals in charge of the capitalist colonial machine coming in to disrupt the culture of the locals. I think that could be a really interesting story. I don't know that George Miller's gonna make another Mad Max movie. This might be his swan song there. I kind of, because he's getting up there. How old is George Miller? George Miller age. He's 79. So, like, he could make another Mad Max movie, but considering it took him 10 years to make this one after Fury Road, that seems less likely, right? Especially as this one disappointingly underperformed at the box office. But if you're gonna make another one, George, I don't know. I think I have an interesting story hook there. If that's a story that you would be interested in telling, you can have that idea. I don't know. Pay me like $100 for it at least, or something. Yeah, exactly, Paco. We're here for your lithium. I mean, to bring the benefits of our civilization. Well, and because like it would be complicated, because like on the one hand, living in the wasteland is objectively horrible. These people do need humanitarian aid. On the other hand, like, they haven't been getting it. The world's outside has been ignoring them. But now that there's something for them to exploit, that's when they show up. And so you could tell stories about, like, the way that, like, you could use humanitarian aid as, like, a smokescreen for just furthering, you know, your country's own, like, economic interests, rather than out of any genuine desire to help people. I don't know. Anyway, I liked Furiosa. I thought it was really good. Really great action set pieces. Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth, fantastic leads. Really like it. And, I don't know. Maybe that's it for Mad Max, but I kind of hope not, because I really like these movies.
Okay. I saw Sight, which until I walked into the theater, I had no idea was another Angel Studios movie. Angel Studios is responsible for The Sound of Freedom and Cabrini. They do that whole like pay it forward system where they get people to give them hundreds of millions of dollars on a website so that you can just go to that website and say, oh, I want to go see the movie. Okay, we're paying for it for you, and consider giving money to pay it forward, right? Every time I have gone to see one of these Angel Studios movies, there's a lot more people in the audience than in other movies that I typically see, presumably because people can just go see it for free. And this movie is about it's a biopic about an eye doctor, Dr. what was his name? Dr. Ming Wang, who pioneered a technique for restoring the vision of somebody who is blinded. And it's very boring. There's a character who, like, he tries the technique on and it fails, and she is not really there as a character. She's just there as, like, inspiration material. Like, it's like, oh yeah, you always have the disabled character in a movie who just is there to inspire the rest of us. It, like, really condescending, really, not seeing disabled people as like actual people, and because it's an Angel Studios film, which is it's a Christian studio that really is seeking to evangelize with its films, and this character, she's like, she was blinded by her mom when she was, well, she's still a little girl, but she was blinded by her mom because blind beggars get more money. But then she was rescued by Catholic nuns who brought her to the States for the surgery, but it didn't work. But she's inspiring people with her witness for Jesus. Because, again, it's Angel Studios. And the movie kind of, like, goes back and forth between the main character, Dr. Wang's history growing up in China. And there's some anachronisms in this movie because, like, it's the scenes are set in like the 70s, and they make it look like the Cultural Revolution is just starting. But by 75, the Cultural Revolution was like winding down, but like all of this scenes are like it's him at a school when like learning things about ancient Chinese dynasties, when a bunch of soldiers come in and they're like, we're not gonna teach about these old people who exploited the workers, and we're gonna force you all to join us in the army. And I'm like, by this point they wouldn't have just shown up and like they were even treated as like rebels. Like they weren't even the way they're talked about in the movie, they're not even like part of the government, and the government was actually like cracking down on them. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Chinese history, particularly in the 20th century, so I could be wrong, but it really felt like they wanted to play up more about the devastating effects of the Cultural Revolution on destroying Chinese culture, but not for like any like critique of the destruction of culture, but more just to be like, well, the Chinese, they were godless heathens, they don't respect Jesus, and that's why they're bad, right? And the movie doesn't seem to do enough though to like actually sell itself as like a Christian movie until like the last act. The main character, he's never really shown to be particularly religious or anything like that, until like the little girl is like inspiring others with her story of not being cured from blindness, and the real miracle is her witness, and not the fact that this guy managed to cure somebody's blindness by the end of the movie. And then the movie ends with the actual Dr. Wang showing up to give his witness as, you know, a Christian and all that and stuff, and he talks about paying it forward. And like at that point, like, it's so nakedly cynical that it made me think of, there was a movie starring Cuba Gooding Jr. I think it's called, yeah, Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story. Here, actually, I think I've got it on Wikipedia. Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story. If you know who Ben Carson is, like, he's a brain surgeon who then joined Trump's cabinet as, was it Housing and Human Services Director? Which has nothing to do with you know, being a brain surgeon, but like, this movie was like how he got on a lot of conservatives' radar, is because they made this inspirational movie about this doctor, and then he used that. So like, I am suspecting that that is the goal, that Dr. Ming Wang wants to use this movie to get into politics, that he wants to use it as a springboard like Ben Carson did, so that he can go and like become, like, you know, I don't know, maybe, hey, Trump's up for re-election in November, maybe he wants to be on Trump's cabinet. Who knows? All I know is this film is very cynical, and it's not even competently made. It's like, even my parents who love Angel Studios, they went and saw this movie and they're like, yeah, it wasn't that good. So hopefully it doesn't land. Hopefully nothing happens. Hopefully this guy doesn't use this to try and become like some, you know, big name. I don't think he's got the charisma for it. Not that Ben Carson had charisma either, but I'm just saying, watch out for Dr. Ming Wang if he starts showing up to opine on political topics, that this movie was just made to get his name out there so that he could do the conservative grift, you know? That's all I gotta say about that one. The Garfield movie is a movie about Garfield, hence the title. I'm glad I could explain that one for you, so that you're not left wondering why the title is what it is. Okay. Chris Pratt has been voicing every cartoon character for about a decade now, and I want to say I'm tired of it. I've already been tired of it. I honestly think he was okay as Garfield. It's not the Lorenzo Music voice that I'm used to. I never watched the ones where Bill Murray was voicing him, but like, considering when I was a kid, I thought Lorenzo Music was Bill Murray, because I'm pretty sure Lorenzo Music voiced Bill Murray's character in the real Ghostbusters. Very similar cadences, those two, but it doesn't really bother me that much that Chris Pratt basically just voices himself. I don't know, it's weird. It's not like I'm the biggest Chris Pratt fan or anything like that, and I have gone on record multiple times saying that animated movies need to be casting veteran voice talent and not movie stars for their, you know, for their animation, because I generally think that, you know, voice acting is a different skill set than cinema acting, and while some movie stars are good voice actors, that doesn't mean that people who have made it their career primarily to be voice actors should get left out of the big budget animated features. It's the and it's a problem that goes back to Aladdin when they cast Robin Williams as the genie, and it's never going away, because they figured out, hey, we can sell the movie on the star power involved in the roster. But like, I'll be real, it's a movie for kids. The kids don't care who's voicing Garfield. They want to go see a movie about a cat going on adventures, and that's kind of what this is.
But then again, the kids aren't the one buying the tickets, their parents are, and the parents know who Chris Pratt is, so I don't know, there you go. Anyway, none of that was about the actual movie, that was just about Chris Pratt. The movie itself is actually pretty decent. It's definitely a kid's movie, and you know, it has that kind of like lowest common denominator vibe. Maybe not as like as egregious as like the Illumination movies do. It feels actually pretty similar to like the Garfield movies that I remember growing up with, like the animated specials and the cartoon, right? The vibes are very similar to that. And I think one of my biggest issues with Garfield as a character, obviously Jim Davis is just, you know, a sellout who literally just made Garfields to make as much money as possible and has merchandised him to hell and back just, you know, to squeeze every penny he can out of it. And so Garfield just has been soulless for decades. But I do remember really liking it as a kid. And, like, I have gained a newfound appreciation for Garfield through Quentin Reviews. I'm sure you all know Quentin Reviews is, like, the biggest Garfield fan ever. And, like, you know, I'm not a Garfield fan anymore, but I can appreciate that he's a Garfield fan, kind of like how Scott Nicewander is like the #1 Scooby-Doo fan, and I'm not really a fan of Scooby-Doo, but I appreciate that he is. I like watching people who really like something talk about their special interest. It's fun. And so maybe like Quentin is probably a better person to look at if you're like looking for somebody who's really passionate about Garfield to review it. From my view, it was like fine. But for Garfield, who's like the famous fat cat, they haven't drawn him fat in forever. And even in this movie, like they make a joke of it where like one of the characters is Garfield's dad, Vic, and Vic is much bigger than Garfield. He's not just fatter, he's like just his frame is a lot bigger. And so you would think that Vic is the fat cat, but no, Garfield's the fat cat. Garfield's the one who's constantly eating. And there's even a moment where like they like lampshade it because they have to like squeeze through a vent, and Vic goes through perfectly fine, but then Garfield gets stuck in the vent. And Garfield even is like, how am I stuck in this vent? You're bigger than me. And then Vic goes, am I? So, you know, like they were obviously acknowledging the fact that Garfield, for being a famous fat cat, hasn't been drawn fat in forever. He's just been drawn with a little pot belly. But beyond that, he's just not. Like, if you look at classic, like the original Garfield strip, Garfield... Here, I'm pulling it up right now. Give me a second. Up that. Alright. This is a fat cat, right? That is a fat cat. But if you like look at the way Garfield is drawn now, it's just he's nowhere near that. It doesn't really sell to me, and so it's just he's not really fat. He eats a lot, and that's not like a specific critique of this movie. That's just a general critique of the way that Garfield is drawn and portrayed. So this movie just kind of lampshades it, but whatever. Paka says the Garfield cartoons of the 80s were a highlight of my childhood. Oh yeah, no, like when I was a kid growing up, I loved Garfield. I had so many of those. I think we just kept checking them out from the library, all of the little, the trade collections of, here's this year's collection of Garfield comics. Winelby says they took his sauce away, he's sauceless. Yeah, like, well, and that's the corporate sellout, the thing that Jim Davis has done, right? Like, I don't even think Jim Davis is drawing or writing the newspaper strip anymore. I think he's just offloaded that job to other people. I think Jim Davis's job is counting his millions of dollars. which is a shame because I don't know. I think there was a period where Garfield was a good comic strip. It's just maybe that period is when you're a kid. Anyway, if you're a parent, this is a fine movie to take your kids to. As far as Garfield projects go, it's pretty decent. It's just, is Garfield still relevant to the 21st century American? I don't know. Ezra is a movie starring Bobby Cannavale and Robert De Niro about a man who has an autistic kid. And I know what you're thinking automatically is like, oh god, how are they going to handle this? Because even though the movie's called Ezra, and Ezra's the name of the kid who's autistic, Ezra's not the main character of the movie. And seeing the trailers for it, I was just worried. I'm like, oh, how well is this going to be handled? Because like it looked from the outside like it was a movie not made for autistic people, but just about autistic people for an holistic audience. And part of that is just an inevitable result of, well, most people are holistic and not autistic, so obviously they have more money. But when you're telling a story about a group of people, you want to make sure that like you get it right and you include those people. And so like I was very, very concerned watching this movie, going into this movie. Once I saw the movie, like I think it actually is phenomenal. The movie is like a fictionalized retelling of like events of like the screenwriter's life raising an autistic kid. And the movie actually talks a lot about, how autism is something that we really haven't understood a lot about until recently. And so even though his kid is diagnosed and he's not, and his dad's not, there are a lot of people who are wondering, like, are we autistic too? Because they have certain social and emotional issues relating to others. The Bobby Cannavale's character has a lot of anger issues that he has trouble regulating in terms of dealing with other people. And the movie kind of like, I almost had like an emotional like breakthrough watching this movie. There was just some scene where Robert De Niro, who plays Bobby Cannavale's dad, is talking to him about like patterns of behavior that he keeps finding himself stuck in, where like he's always seeing himself as the aggrieved party with somebody on the outside that he's fighting against, and once he's defeated somebody, well, then he just goes and finds somebody else that is now the enemy that he has to fight. And like it's a never-ending cycle, and he never knows how to get out of it. And like that spoke directly to me, and so like that alone is definitely making me perceive this movie better. But also like the kid Ezra himself, I think he is portrayed fairly accurately in terms of an autistic kid. Like it's not like the Rain Man situation where, it's like, oh yeah, no, he's a genius, he just doesn't know how to interact with people. Like, no, he's a kid. He's just a kid who, has certain, misses certain social cues. Like the Bobby Cannavale's character is he's a stand-up comic, and like he like takes his kid to one of his shows, and his kid just keeps like shouting out the punchlines to his routine because his kid's heard his routine before, and like, just dealing with like, hey, okay, kid, you gotta shut up. I'm telling the jokes now, stuff like that. And I don't know. The central story of the movie is that like, because of Bobby Cannavale's violent tendencies, he actually loses like visitation rights for his son, but his son is also like being put on some like pretty severe medication because they like misinterpreted some of his son's behaviors,
and so he ends up kidnapping his son to try, because he's like, look, I've got to save my kid from all of these people who just want to dope him up. And so it's a road trip movie dealing with the ethics of, hey, you just kidnapped a kid, but also like you can understand why he did that, and like his ex-wife who's like trying to chase him down and track him, and like, so like I don't think it's a perfect movie, but I think the subject matter is handled with care. I would be very interested in somebody who is actually autistic. I would be interested in their perspective on it. I don't think I'm autistic. I took one of those tests for it, and it was like I was in that range where it's like, no, you're not quite autistic, but you're like high. But like I have ADHD, and there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and autism. So I don't know, ish maybe. And I found a lot to resonate with in this film, but I would be interested in somebody who is diagnosed autistic, what they think about this movie. Vera Farmiga is in the movie. She plays a very minor character. She's just like an old friend of Bobby Cannavale's who helps them out for a little bit. And I wish she was in the movie longer because I love Vera Farmiga, and I've talked about this before, like in my review of the Conjuring movies, that like I think she is like a singular talent in her generation, and she's being wasted. Like I don't think she's being given the roles that are meaty enough to match her level of talent. Like, go watch Bates Motel. She knocks it out of the park. She's such a good actress, and like a lot of what she gets is just kind of crap roles. And this isn't a crap role. It's just, as soon as she showed up, I was like, oh, she should have been in this movie 30 minutes earlier. I love her. I'm always going to be singing Vera Farmiga's praises. I think she's phenomenal. I don't think this movie is like inspiration porn. Like I don't think it's like, oh, here's all the things that I learned because of my autistic kid necessarily. But it is in that general area. I really liked the movie. I think some people might take some issues with it. That's why I'm curious to listen to somebody who's diagnosed autism, what their take is on the movie. But I genuinely really liked it, except for the ending, or I should say like the credits, post-credit scene, because like part of the thing is that he's a stand-up comic, and as he's kidnapped his kid, Jimmy Kimmel has booked him on his show. But he lives in New York and Kimmel films in LA, and so he's got to like drive all the way to, across country with his kidnapped kid in tow. So, there's all that. But at the end, it shows him like actually like meeting Jimmy Kimmel, and you can tell that Bobby Cannavale and Jimmy Kimmel are not on set at the same time, because like it's always like, when it's Bobby Cannavale, it's just Bobby Cannavale in shot, and maybe you see the shoulder of Jimmy Kimmel. And when it's Jimmy Kimmel in shot, you don't see Bobby Cannavale at all. So like it's very painfully obvious that they just shot these things separate. And honestly, Jimmy Kimmel's kind of annoying. Just in general, he is certainly not my favorite late night show host. And I felt like throwing that in, it like didn't even fit the tone of the rest of the movie. It was far more comedic than the rest of the movie, and it just kind of was just like, you're just putting this in here because the whole getting on Kimmel was like, one of his motivations in the movie, but it didn't fit with it. Otherwise, I really like this movie. I would recommend it. In a Violent Nature is exactly how you keep the slasher genre fresh. This movie, if you read a plot synopsis of it, it's very bare bones. You'd just be like, oh, okay, well, this is just a Friday the 13th ripoff. But it's in the execution that changes everything. this movie is shot entirely from the perspective of the slasher. And like it's a lot of like long tracking shots with very minimal cutting, usually just kind of like an over the shoulder shot of the killer as he's going through, and occasionally like when he goes and is just like observing people, you'll have the camera break from him and start like following some of the other characters, but almost always like observing them from a distance. And like little like plot details about who the killer is and what his motivations are, and you know like he's kind of a supernatural, you know, slasher dude. All of that is just like slowly interspersed through like little bits of dialogue that you pick up from other people, but for the most part you're just following this guy as he's lumbering through the woods, picking people off one by one. And for the first like 30 minutes of the movie, I thought it was going to be very different. Like the tone, there's a little bit of it was a little bit over the top with some of the kills. Some of them were a little goofy, but I still thought it was a little more serious up until he pulls somebody's head through the hole he punched in their torso. And once he did that, I was like, okay, I got it. This is a goofy slasher movie, just done in a really creative way. And you know, I had to reassert my expectations at that point and go, okay, now I know what I'm here for. I had a lot of fun with it. I would say the biggest criticism I have of the movie is the end has... I think the end does a very, very clever thing where even after the final girl is like, you think she's like... It would be the point in another slasher movie where she's gotten away and she's safe now. And it lingers on that point for so long that like the tension really doesn't drop, and you're just like expecting something to happen at any point. And I appreciate that it went really long with that, because that really kept like the whole thing is so tense at the end. But I think it went too long. I think it's probably I think if it was like 90% of its length, I think that would have been good. But I think it was, I got what they were going for, and I thought it worked really well up until like right at the end. It's like, okay, this scene's dragged on just a little bit too long. So in terms of pacing, I would cut that scene just a little bit shorter. Not too much, just a little bit, because I really liked what they were doing with it, where at the point where you think she's safe, the movie very much... It just in how like it just keeps dragging and keeps dragging. You can't feel safe. You're sitting there in dread the whole time, and I thought that was really well done. Like I said, in terms of the plot, like you could literally just be like a Friday the 13th knockoff, but it's all in the execution. And if you're looking for really over the top, gory, you know, kills, like this has those in spades. Very goofy slasher character. There's some good laughs, but like honestly, I think this is probably the most revolutionary take on the slasher genre since Scream. I'll say it. I really liked this one. Highly recommend you see it. Give me a second. I need to pull up phone notes on this one. Okay. Young Woman in the Sea is a movie about Trudy Everly, the first woman ever to swim the English Channel. And there was a movie at the Oscars this year called Naiad, which was about a woman who swam from Cuba to Florida. And there's going to be obvious parallels because they're both about doing a really long endurance swim. So
a lot of that aspect of the film just feels very, very similar, almost beat for beat. But the difference between these two movies is that Naiad is a very dishonest movie because, like, they portray her as, like, she's the first one to swim from Cuba to Florida, even though her record itself is in question, and, like, the general, like, aquatic society, I don't remember the name of them, they were just like, your telemetry for this section of the trip is missing, and you've been very, very, very cagey about what happened, so it sounds like you probably can't, like, you know, broke the rules and, like, maybe came aboard the boat that was assigned you, or did something that, like, violated it, and they've been covering it up. Don't have to worry about any of that for this movie, because Trudy Everly's swimming of the English Channel is pretty well documented. It's not in dispute. And because this movie is set in the early 20th century, when women's suffrage and women's rights are very much more, at the forefront, and it's a far more oppressive time to be a woman than 100 years later. That's where a big part of just the general film conflict is. Like, when she's a little kid, like, the scene, the movie opens with a really awful steamboat accident in the Hudson Bay, in which, like, hundreds of people died, mostly women, because they were not able to swim to shore, because they couldn't swim, because women aren't taught to swim. And that right there kind of informs Trudy's character, that she wants to swim, and, but she had the measles, and so they don't want her in the pool because, even though she recovered from the measles, they're worried about, communicability after the fact. There's also the fact that she's been told that swimming could damage her hearing as somebody with measles, and in real life, Trudy Everly did eventually go deaf, but, she really wanted to swim, so I think she considered that a trade-off. And I think the movie does talk at the end, like, when it does the blurb about, oh, here's what they went on to do, like, that she spent her life, like, teaching deaf children to swim after that. And so the movie is it's starring Daisy Ridley, and I really like Daisy Ridley. I've liked Daisy Ridley ever since The Force Awakens. And a lot of people talk about how, like, Daisy Ridley, she hasn't done anything since Star Wars. This is, like, the second movie I've reviewed of hers in the last year. They're not, like, blockbusters by any stretch, but, like, she's still doing a lot of work, and she's a really good actress, and I think she did a good job in this one. And the movie is really, just about, it's kind of a general, like, women's empowerment kind of a movie, set in a period where we can all look back and go, well, obviously you were being too sexist. So it is, like, it's 100 years ago, so it is enough removed from modern day that, even conservatives can go watch it and be like, yeah, I'm glad women are doing better than they were back then. Can pat themselves on the back and not have to worry about all the ways that women are still, second-class citizens in today's society. But, it's still, it's a pretty decent, like, in terms of, like, an inspirational sports movie. I liked it. I think Daisy Ridley gives a very charming performance. Christopher Eccleston plays her coach, who does not want her to succeed. And he's also, like, he's kind of a failed swimmer, because he's tried to swim the English Channel and he has never successfully done it, but he keeps trying to set her up for failure. I didn't even realize it was Christopher Eccleston until, like, I saw the end credits, but I'm like, oh yeah, Christopher Eccleston does a really good job at playing jerks. And he keeps that up with this one. But I love that dude, so love to see him in things. Yeah, I just, again, if sports movies aren't your thing, you're probably not going to get that much out of this one.
it is what it is. It's a movie about a woman who, fights against the odds to, become an Olympic swimmer in a time when when it was considered inappropriate for women to even be swimming, and perseveres, goes to the Olympics, and then swims the English Channel. So, and I think, like, I don't know how true it is, because movies that are like biopics about sports people, they'll often exaggerate stuff, but I think they said that, like, once she swam the English Channel, that she had the biggest parade for an athlete in New York history. It could be true. I haven't independently verified that, but she's the first woman to swim the English Channel, and I think only the third or fourth person ever to do it. So that is a very, very impressive record, especially because she held the world record for time for swimming the English Channel for like a quarter century after. So she was a very good swimmer. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that one. But it was fine. The Watchers is the film directorial debut of Ishana Night Shyamalan, the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan. And I've talked about nepotism on my channel before, and how I think a lot of people miss the mark when they're talking about it, because like, for instance, there was a video I saw probably about a year ago where Red Letter Media, they were talking about it, and they were talking about how, like, growing up with somebody in the industry, you're going to, like, pick up and learn certain things that are going to give you an edge just in that regard. And that's true. Like, yeah, for sure. A blacksmith's son is probably going to pick up a little bit about how to be a blacksmith. A director's daughter, I don't know, maybe she was on set some days watching him. And so, like, it's not always like, oh, well, you only got this job because of nepotism and you weren't very good. I think this movie is very competently directed. For a feature, for a film debut, I think she does a good job here. It's just more about, for my mind, the issue is nepotism is more about the opportunity, right? Because everyone wants to be in Hollywood. Everyone wants a job in Hollywood. And so a lot of people have that talent that are never given the opportunity because they aren't the child of a successful film director. And it's not to say that, I mean, certainly there are, Nepo babies who suck and aren't very good, but there are Nepo babies who are very talented. Jack Quaid, I quite like him. Drew Barrymore, well, I'm Scab, so, we don't really like her anymore, but I would say, in terms of talent, I have quite liked things that I've seen her in. But just generally speaking, I am averse to seeing family members of, like, big names in Hollywood get a shot just because they're family members. So I have to kind of dock it just for that. Also, especially because this feels very much like an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Like, if you had told me M. Night Shyamalan directed this movie, yeah, I would have just believed you. That being said, there's my criticism of nepotism out of the way. Now let's talk about the movie. It's pretty good. The movie is about a woman who gets lost in the forest in Ireland and meets up with some people who are, like, living in a bunker, and there's a bunch of creatures that come out at night called Watchers that are, like, stalking them, and it's just them dealing with this monster creature. And when you hear lost in a forest in Ireland and creatures in the woods, you can probably piece together what they're actually going to be. Like it's fairly obvious. I'm not going to say it, but you can pick up what I'm saying. Like we generally have people have like a general idea of, just Irish folklore in general, right? And I'll just leave it at that. The characters are fairly flat in like that Shyamalan style where like characters will literally just state their motivations to the other characters like in a very matter-of-fact way. That for like a kind of like a storybook fairy tale kind of a writing style works, but for films meant to be enjoyed by adults who have more, nuanced and sophisticated tastes, gets a little basic. And it's, it's not like the movie is bereft of talent. I think Dakota Fanning she's the main character, and I have been a fan of Dakota Fanning since she was a kid. I think she's like I think it's actually fairly rare to have a child star like maintain their talents into adulthood, and I think Dakota Fanning is actually pretty good at that. But in this film, I think her performance is not the best, and I kind of want to blame that on the director. A lot of performance is not just the actor, it's a relationship between the actor and the director. And if the director isn't communicating to the actors what it is that they want out of them, or is communicating the wrong thing to them, you like a bad director can make a stellar actor look horrible. Like just honestly, a good example, Hayden Christensen's a really good actor, but you wouldn't know it from watching the prequels because George Lucas famously cannot direct actors. Famously, George Lucas's direction for his actors is always faster and more intense. And that's it. That's all he knows how to do, because he's not an actor's director. And I don't necessarily think that Ishana Shyamalan is an actor's director. But then, like I said, sounds like she's taking after Dad. Shyamalan characters, just in general, tends to be that very flat, stating their motivations very matter-of-factly to the camera or to another character, and this suffers from that. But other than that, like I think for a freshman premiere, I think it's a fairly decent film. I enjoyed myself with it. Twists are pretty easy to anticipate, but that's not always a bad thing. Like, I think any plot twist that ruins your enjoyment of a movie is a bad plot twist. I think if you know the twist going into a movie and it ruins your enjoyment of the film, I think that's a bad plot twist. But like, probably my go-to example is I didn't see Fight Club until I had already been spoiled about Tyler Durden. And in fact, that's the only reason I went to see Fight Club, because before then I had just seen the trailers, which made it look stupid. And I really enjoyed it. Now, I would have liked to go back and maybe watch it with, a fresh set of eyes so that I don't know the twist going into it. But I don't think knowing the twist ruins the movie. I think it enhances it. And so for this movie, I don't necessarily know that knowing the twist would enhance it in any way, but I don't think it ruins it. And honestly, I think you hear it and you're like, okay, that seems fairly obvious. But like, yeah, a good twist has just enough setup that like you go back and watch it again and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't pick that up. And this isn't that, but it's not like trying to bash you over the head with the twist. The twist felt like a fairly natural progression from the way that the story was going. So,
It's a Shyamalan movie. I gotta talk. There's a twist. Yeah. I hope Ashana is able to carve out a niche for herself directing that is not so much in her father's shadow. This is still solidly there. This is still, like I said, if you told me M. Night directed it, I would believe you. But it's okay. Bad Boys, Ride or Die is the 4th Bad Boys movie. And I'm trying to think if I've seen any of them other than the first Bad Boys. I have seen the first Bad Boys, and it's possible that I saw the second one. I really can't remember. I didn't see the third one, but don't worry. You can get into this one without having seen any of them. They'll tell you all of the relevant information about the characters that you need to know. But, you know, buddy cop movie set in Miami. Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, they have a very, like... They have a good rapport with each other, but it has that, like, kind of, like... Michael Bay misanthropic bent to it, where, like, you know, it's like they're always angry with each other in kind of a toxic masculine way. Lindsay Ellis has talked about this at length in her Full Plate series, where she used the Transformers movies as a springboard to just talk about film theory in general. And but it's, you know, it's a buddy cop movie, so there's going to be issues of just general propaganda that are, like, baked in and inherent to that genre. And honestly, like, if you look at the actions of these characters with how loose they are with, like, just shooting people, there's even, like, they shoot a guy in a convenience store and then just leave and then go to a wedding. And, like, Will Smith it's never brought up that he just shot a guy in the knee. Like, he never has to, like, be investigated for it. The fact that he shot the guy and didn't even arrest him because he was, you know, he's like, I'm late, I'm going to a wedding. It's just never brought up again. They will wave guns at people's faces constantly in this movie that they're not even, like, actually trying to shoot. They're just trying to threaten them, and it's just never treated as, like, something morally abhorrent. It's just kind of just accepted as, yeah, no, they're bad boys, you know, they're edgy cops on, you know, doing their own thing. They don't, you know, follow the rules and all that stuff, which makes them cool, even though, you know, I don't really want cops to do that. I mean, I don't really want cops in general, but all of that aside, this is a really solid action movie. It's not directed by Michael Bay. I think it's a new director duo who I think they directed the last one as well, but I didn't see it. But it has all of the Michael Bay isms, which makes sense. Michael Bay directed the first 2 movies. It is a Michael Bay franchise. Michael Bay has a little cameo in this one. He's driving a car and almost runs over Will Smith. But there's some really fun, creative ways of the action set pieces. Like, there's multiple times where, like, they have a camera on a drone flying through, like, the whole, like, set, so that you get, like, a good, like, feel like you're a bird flying through the action. There's a cool sequence where you're, like, it's like a point of view sequence where the camera is just, like, looking down the barrel of the gun as they're shooting stuff, kind of like the, you know, in the sequence in the Doom movie. There's a real, honestly, I think my favorite action set piece in the movie is where they're watching a firefight happen on a security camera, and the film camera, like, keeps going into, like, the monitor that they're looking at, and then, like, shifting to the actual sequence, and then moving from being the security camera on the wall to being a camera in the set. And it keeps, like, moving back and forth, so, like, the camera pulls back, and then you're pulling out of the monitor and watching it there. That was, I thought, was a really clever sequence. The story itself is fairly standard, you know, like, there's, you know, themes of, you know, family and you know, your general, oh, the cops have been framed and they're on the run and all this stuff, and you, like,
you know immediately who the bad people are. Ioan Griffith shows up in this movie, and you just know Ioan Griffith is going to be a bad guy because he's Ioan Griffith, and the only time he wasn't a bad guy was when he was playing Mr. Fantastic. So you just know, okay, can't trust that guy because he's Ioan Griffith. But, you know, like, in terms of depth, you're not going to get it, but, like, it is just a summer action blockbuster. Honestly, the biggest selling point for this movie and the biggest audience reaction, at least in my theater, that there was in this movie, is that Will Smith gets slapped 3 times in a row. And I think this is the first movie that he filmed after the infamous slap at the Oscars. So if you want to see him get, you know, get some comeuppance for that one, you could go see it, because that alone, that's like, oh man. There are some people who were just losing their shit in the theater. Anyway. Bad Boys Ride or Die. It's a movie. Fun action. Kind of dumb. Toxic masculinity kind of baked into the buddy cop genre to begin with. So, I don't know. You know all that stuff. So, there is my critique. But I genuinely had a fun time watching this movie. It was fine. Wow. And there, I did it. I got through my backlog of movies. There were 2 movies that I decided to ditch. One of them because I walked out of it halfway through. That was called Summer Camp, which was probably one of the worst comedy movies I've ever seen. That's why I walked out halfway through. It's not even worth, you know, mentioning beyond that. And then there was an animated movie I saw called Dragon Keeper, I think. And it was very bland, and honestly, I was kind of dozing off in the theater, so I didn't feel like I could give it a decent shake at a review anyway. But there, I've done it. I've pushed through. I've reviewed all of the movies. And I'm tired. I know I was talking about, you know, just dealing with the anxiety of coming back to stream. And honestly, once I'm back in streaming, that goes away. It's just the anxiety building up to doing it. But I am pretty tired after reviewing, like, what, 15 movies? What was that count? I think it was like 15 movies. So I don't think I'm going to play games after this. I think I'm just going to call it here. So let me see who is streaming that I can send y'all to. Doge. I'm just gonna send y'all over to him. So go wish Doge all of my best, and have a lovely evening. Bye.